The first experience happened a few months ago. I was in my sophomore year and was preparing for my teaching practicum. Anyway, it was sometime close to 2 or after 2 in the morning. I was writing my lesson plans with the lights off, so the only light from my laptop lit up the room. I was at it for a few hours due to idling on YouTube, but when I was almost at the end, I suddenly felt uneasy, as if someone was in the room watching me. When I looked up, my attention was averted to the door, which was right in front of me. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me due to prolonged exposure to my laptop screen. But when I really looked closely, I saw a shadow forming right in front of me. I was confused at first and was saying to myself, what the fuck is that? Then it dawned on me what was happening, and I was like, oh shit. It began manifesting itself and was forming into this shadow man, if you would call it that. I proceeded to continue my work as to not allow it to know I knew it was there. But the atmosphere got more and more uncomfortable, till I was fixated on it only. I watched it for a few minutes as it just stood there not moving, until it just disappeared. The moment I got the opportunity to move, I quickly got up and flicked on the light, and obviously nothing there. I stayed with the light on for the rest of the night. The second incident happened a few weeks ago. I was trying to get some sleep but was unable to, no matter how hard I tried. Eventually I dozed off and began dreaming this weird dream. I tried to wake up and I did. Well, so I thought. Apparently I tried twice, and when I thought I was awake, I was still in this dream state and couldn't move or talk, or even scream out. I knew someone or something was behind me, but to be honest, I wasn't going to take the chance and look what was there. For context, my back was to the same door I saw the shadow figure. I felt this electric charge the whole time running through my body, and then my eyes went shut, and I couldn't open them, no matter how hard I tried. This woman then came over to me. Mind you, my eyes were shut, but it was as if I could see her, even though it was happening. How is this possible? She then tried to lift me off my bed to carry me to God knows where, and I tried to put a counterforce on her, not allowing her to carry this out, whatever it was. This happened for the next 5 minutes, I believe, until she relented and I woke up in a panic, looking all around with nothing and no one in sight. Best believe it took a while to go back to sleep. Nothing has happened since, and I want to keep it that way. What are your thoughts on this? When I was 8 or 9, I saw something weird on Christmas Eve. This was many, many years ago, but I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still believed in Santa Claus then, as a good amount of children do, and I had the usual anxiety and excitement for Santa to leave Christmas presents by the tree. After I went to bed, I had some trouble going to sleep with holiday nerves and such. I had finally drifted off when I woke up to the sound of soft footsteps somewhere in my room. I automatically assumed it was Santa Claus, and I was scared to see him for fear he might leave or his magic would fail. I opened one eye just barely and saw this black figure standing over my bed, staring at me. It was tall, probably around 6 feet tall, and was completely dark. It looked almost blacker than black in a way. I couldn't see any eyes, a mouth, or a nose on it, but I could clearly see the outline of a head, arms, body and legs. It looked like a bigger person, so thinking it was Santa just made sense. It stayed in one spot for 10, maybe 15 seconds, until it took a few steps closer. It leaned in a little more, still a few feet away from me, and then stayed there for 10 or 15 seconds more. Even though I couldn't see a face, I knew it was looking right at me. It's just that weird feeling you get when you know you're being watched or looked at. I closed my eyes again and waited for a few minutes. When I looked back, it was gone. I lived in a pretty old house at the time, so the doors and floorboards were squeaky and loud. I heard footsteps, but I'd never heard the door open. I never saw this figure again, though I've had some other spooky experiences in this house. I asked my mom if she heard Santa when he came into my room last night, and she looked confused for a second. Then she played along and just assumed I was lying. I know this wasn't a person, and I know this wasn't a dream. I also know that spirits and entities are often attracted to lots of excitement or energy, so Christmas would be a perfect time for a ghost to pass through. This happened the summer before I started 7th grade and middle school. Now I'm 29. I remember this pretty well because in the first week of 7th grade, we were asked to write anything about our summer vacation for a writing prompt. So I wrote about my weird encounter. My best friend had just spent the night, and it was now the morning after. My dad had left earlier that morning to go to work, middle of work week, and my brother was still over at his friend's house from the previous night. It was just me and my friend that morning, but she had to leave early for a swim meet, so it would just be chilling all day by myself. I was chilling on the couch in the living room, watching Newlyweds on TV, while my friend was changing into her swimsuit. She lived down the street, so her mom was there to pick her up right after she changed. This now left me alone in the house. I continued watching Newlyweds while sitting on the couch in my PJs, one of my dad's giant t-shirts, when the TV started changing channels. I immediately looked down at the remote, thinking I'd somehow hit a button, but I hadn't. The TV was still changing channels while I was holding the remote. I'm now thinking to myself, well, fine. I wasn't really enjoying this show anyways, and was thinking I'd read a book instead. I'm sitting there thinking this to myself when a loud banging noise pretty much erupted right through the wall next to me, banging really loud over and over. At this point, I'm ready to leave the house immediately and walk to my mom's house, but I'm still wearing only a giant t-shirt. I start walking towards my room feeling sketched out when I hear a door slam. As I'm walking down the hallway, I see it must have been my bedroom door. Trying to be logical, I figured it must be a weird airflow kind of thing, but still wanted to get out of the house ASAP. I reach my bedroom door and try to open it, but it's locked. I then decided it would be perfectly fine walking to my mom's house in just a giant t-shirt. My dad's house is creepy. For context, during my lifetime, my parents have had 4 dogs. Let's call them E, Labrador Retriever, male, M, Finnish Lapphund, female, S, Labrador Retriever, male, and our current dog N, Labrador Retriever, male. We got our current dog N late last January, and our previous dog S passed away early last December. M passed away in 2015, and E has been dead for over 15 years now. I'm spending Christmas with my parents as always. Last year, early Christmas Eve morning, my father showed me an interesting finding. He had found some of M's fur on our foyer's carpet, just out of nowhere. She had black fur. All of our other dogs were yellow, so it was easy to recognise. We had kept some of her fur before she passed to compare it to as well. No other animals had visited us previously either. It was definitely her fur. It was a nice reminder since that was our first Christmas without S. M and S used to be friends before M passed, M being the strong-willed and feisty leader of these two. We speculated it might have fallen from our Christmas decoration box, and we just hadn't noticed it earlier. Strange, but comforting. We joked around that M had paid us a visit. We cleaned the Christmas decoration box just in case, and didn't find fur or anything else of place in it. Just now, I was decorating the tree with my mother. I noticed a white piece of something on the kitchen table before we brought the Christmas decoration box in, but didn't pay it any attention.
I thought it was a dried up piece of gum that my mom eats or something. Later, however, I inspected it closer and noticed that it was too hard to dry up the gum. I flipped it around and came to a quick conclusion. It was a tooth, presumably a dog's tooth. At least it wasn't a human tooth. It looked slightly old and it was smaller than any of our Labrador's teeth would have been. I even asked my father if he had brought it in from the outside, but he hadn't seen it before. Our dog's end's mouth wasn't bleeding, missing any teeth, nor was the tooth bloody or even moist from slobber. Furthermore, it's too small to be his tooth. It does feel like a real tooth to me too, as I've inspected animal teeth before. Once is a happenstance, twice is a coincidence. Guess we'll have to wait until next Christmas to see if 3 is a pattern, and if we'll get a third reminder of M. Never before the passing of S did we find anything like this. Do you have any thoughts on this? Any similar experiences?
This happened on Christmas 2 years ago, and I still can't believe it. For some context, me and my parents have always been familiar with paranormal or strange happenings in our lives. But ever since my sister passed about 7 years ago, it seems to have increased, with the fairly obvious reason as to why. Me and my sister were very close, and every major holiday or celebration, I always get little hints, I don't know what to call them, that she's there. Well, on Christmas 2 years ago, my mum noticed a robin on our fence. Robins are a sign of past loved ones. We strongly believe this was my sister coming to see us for the holidays. As this was happening, I was trying to find my train ticket as I'd booked to go see my long-distance girlfriend for the holidays. My parents were standing at the door watching the robin, and after I got my train ticket in my hand, I went to look at the robin. I remember these series of events very distinctly. I went to the window to see the robin with my train ticket in my hand. The robin waited until I had seen it before it flew off. Me and my parents conferred and all mutually agreed it was my sister. After a moment of silence, I realized my train ticket was no longer in my hand. I was totally weirded out as both my parents had seen me grab it and come to the window with it in my hand. We all looked up for it for a solid 30 minutes, all to no avail. At this point, I'd already texted my girlfriend to apologise that I wasn't going to be able to make my train because my ticket had randomly disappeared. Well, 30 minutes later, the most cliche thing possible happens, and a news report comes in saying that a train had crashed because of a random outburst of snow. It was my train. If I hadn't lost my train ticket, I would have definitely been on that train and most likely would not be alive. It's definitely one of the craziest things that's ever happened to me, and I don't think it's a coincidence.
Look, I don't believe in any paranormal stuff, and I don't really worship anything. But tonight, I heard something knocking outside my home, very loudly, so my dog heard it too. German Shepherd Husky mix. I went to check, thinking maybe my stepdad was taking out my other dog, and he got locked out. But nothing was there. This was around 11:30. I live in North Carolina and have neighbours across from me, and to my sides with a pasture of horses to the left, and woods in the back. It's 2015/16, and I'm going out to take my dog out in the back, near the start of my woods. It's snowing now as it's around Christmas time, much like it is today. I'm around 11 or 12 at the time, so when I started to hear wind chimes or music box-like sounds coming from the woods, I panicked a little bit and brought my dog into the house. Later I told my uncle and grandma, who didn't seem to believe me, but at the time reports of clowns luring kids in the woods started to appear in the news in South Carolina. Yes, this was a real thing and a real panic here. So maybe they would cut me some slack. This wasn't the case, and they didn't seem to believe me. My uncle, however, said there was an old house back there across from our property line, so he said maybe it was them. But it wasn't that kind of music, and he didn't believe me when I said what it sounded like. Fast forward to now, 2021, December 3rd. It's around Christmas time again. I'm now 17. My uncle's recently deceased. I've moved into the house with the woods with my mother and stepdad. However, it's not snowing currently, and I've yet to really go back there, so I've not heard of it again. After hearing something knock and walk around outside, separated in time by maybe an hour, I finally looked up my experience and found that people have similar experiences around the same time, same sounds, and similar settings. If it snows this season, I'm taking my dog out there to see if I hear it again.
The year was 2000. I and my two sons, then 8 and 1-year-old, had moved into a newly renovated apartment. The building was a row of 4 townhouse apartments, and I was between 2 empty units, with the only other occupied unit being on the end. My husband was away from home for a few weeks. We lived in Okinawa for 6 years, but only spent 2 of them in this house. It was around 1 a.m. on our first night in the new apartment, and I was in the kitchen decorating and putting things away. Completely quiet, no radio or TV on. Kids had been asleep for a few hours. The kitchen was an L shape. I was standing at the sink and window, which faced the front of the building. Behind me by several feet was a swinging door to the dining room. To my left by several feet was a swinging door to the entryway/stairs to the bedrooms. It was from that side door that I heard a voice, a child. Mommy? If you've ever heard a child wake up disoriented from a bad dream, or a child about to be ill, it was that level of distress. Just a single word, right outside the door to the kitchen. Mommy? Naturally, I assumed it was my 8-year-old, so I called his name and opened the door. No one there. As I was standing there assessing, mere seconds ticked by and I heard it again. Only this time from the landing at the top of the stairs. Mummy? I was mildly disturbed at this point, but I called his name again and went upstairs. I looked in both their rooms. Both kids were sound asleep, doors still closed. Now I was definitely disturbed, but I somehow managed to go back to the kitchen and finish what I was doing. A month later, my mother was visiting from the States. One night, she was upstairs using the bathroom and came downstairs to ask me why I had called her. I hadn't mentioned the voice yet. I told her all about it. The next night, she was sleeping in the sofa bed in the living room. My 8-year-old was with her. She woke up in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, followed by a coughing fit, which had been a frequent thing for her, and eventually felt a hand patting and rubbing her back. When she stopped coughing, she turned to thank the 8-year-old. He was sound asleep, on his side facing away from her. Fast forward a couple of weeks. My husband decided to give me a break one morning and got up with the 1-year-old. After I got up, he told me about some strange things that happened. He had put the toddler in the high chair and gave him part of a banana, putting the rest of it, still in the peel, well out of reach. He left the room for a minute, came back, and the child had the rest of the banana, peel empty where my husband had left it. No way he could have gotten it himself. Husband left the room again and rushed back when the stereo, which had been on very low, suddenly turned to max volume. How I slept through that, I have no idea. When he went to turn it down, he saw something odd in the corner of the room which, strangely, he already couldn't remember when he was relaying this all to me. It was blank in his mind. He's super skeptical of everything, and I think he intentionally blocked whatever or whoever it was he saw there. Every year, we would get 2 or 3 typhoons. During one typhoon in 2001, after several hours, the eye of the storm was perfectly over us. When this would happen, my husband and I would go outside and enjoy the fresh air, assess the area, talk with the neighbours, etc., before the storm returned to blow in the opposite direction. In the eye of a typhoon, things are super calm and quiet. We were right outside the open front door of the porch, and the kids were upstairs. And out of nowhere, this horrible scream pierces the air in the staircase. Think like horror film, woman being murdered in the shower kind of scream. The kind that echoes and sends chills down the spine. It didn't sound like a kid at all, but my first thought was my son's. Husband and I yanked open the screen door and I called out the kids in a panic, right as they both ran to the top of the stairs, both completely freaked out. Talking to my oldest now, almost 30, he describes hearing the scream of a woman and thinking I had been seriously hurt. Talking to my oldest son in recent years, he's recounted to me things he experienced in that house that he never mentioned when we were living there. He experienced things often, but there are two stories in particular that stand out to him. The first, he went to bed one night and turned on his radio. It was set to full blast, something he didn't do. He turned it off quickly and then heard a man in the hallways bang violently on his bedroom door while yelling, "Hey!" My son called out an apology and then came downstairs to get some water and noticed that my husband and I were both on the couch watching TV. He knew it wasn't his dad that had banged on the door. Second, my son had gone to bed and was laying there for a few minutes, not sleeping, when something made him open his eyes and look at the foot of his bed. Kneeling at the foot of his bed and seemingly playing with a toy or something on the edge of the bed was a girl. She was facing him but looking down at what was in her hands. Behind her and slightly to the side was a boy with his back turned, seemingly touching my son's DVDs on the bookcase. He said they looked to be about his age and kind of blue and dark, like a poorly lit hologram. He kept staring, thinking that when his eyes adjusted, they would disappear, just part of his imagination. He said maybe 20 or 30 seconds went by and they both looked at him at the same time. The boy turning and the girl looking up, locking eyes with him. He said the expressions on their faces seemed like they were not happy they'd been seen. They completely froze like that and slowly faded away. When the fade was complete, his DVDs fell off the shelf. When he got up the next morning, the DVDs were on the floor and he knew he hadn't imagined it. We kept in touch with 2 out of 3 neighbours in that building, and we talked about the place years later. They all experienced things involving kids' voices, pranks played, cabinet doors opened, etc. But the one that really sticks out, one neighbour's 8-year-old son was tentatively diagnosed with schizophrenia. He'd been hearing the voices of children outside his bedroom door, demanding that he play with them, or they would hurt his baby brother. So they sent the family back to the States where he could get adequate services. Thing is, when they left Okinawa and that apartment, the voices stopped entirely. No drugs required. Diagnosis revoked. We've been back to the States 20 years now and have never experienced anything like it, before or since. My son and I have developed a headcanon around this place, that a US soldier had killed his family and then himself.
So due to having a family that don't celebrate Christmas, due to religious reasons, I often spend Christmas with my girlfriend and her family. In my girlfriend's room at the top of her wardrobe is a music box which was a gift from her mother from a Christmas years ago, I believe. It's just a little wind-up music box that you twist and it plays "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." Anyway, we'd all done the standard opening of the presents, pulled some crackers, said Merry Christmas, etc. Then me and the girlfriend and her mum went upstairs to put the presents somewhere out of the way. My girlfriend's mum was talking about how her own mother, who died a few years ago, and how she loved Christmas and wished she could still be there with them all. Straight after that, this music box starts going off on top of the wardrobe, way too high for anyone to have reached and turned, and nobody had even been near that part of the room. Also, interestingly, my girlfriend's room was previously her grandmother's room, and my girlfriend only moved into the room after the death of her grandmother. My girlfriend's mother believes it to be a message from her own mother, letting them all know she's still with them. We're all not sure, but it was interesting timing nonetheless, and I've no idea how it would have been set off otherwise.
So I'd like to start by saying I had a paranormal investigation team come to my apartment. They cleansed it, and it all seemed to calm down for the most part after their 3rd visit. But just before Christmas activity exploded, doors slamming open in my apartment, Voices, running footsteps, the faucet turning off and on by itself, even my dog getting pet sometimes, and what looks like slapped others. I also have a clear as day voice memo of my friend and I sitting on the couch. On Saturday, while I was using the bathroom, it sounded like someone broke into my apartment. I still have Christmas decorations up, and the jingle bells on my front door went ballistic, like someone swung the door open and shut it. Granted, I never heard the door shut, and it was locked. It was about 1:30 a.m. and I live alone. My dog and kitten were hissing and snarling like someone they hate just walked in. I must stress that my kitten and dog are very loving towards each other and don't ever fight each other. I'm 5'1" and about 110 pounds. I'm not big, but I tried to make myself seem as mean as possible, and I ran out of the bathroom with one of my little pocket tasers out. What I saw when I exited the bathroom was shocking to say the least. The heavy tray full of random things on my coffee table was now on the floor. Mind you, the only sound I'd heard before this was booming footsteps, not something that I have trouble picking up sometimes laying on the ground. All of the cabinets on my side table and coffee table were open, and I think the scariest part was my bar stools were still when I passed them. But as I checked the still locked doors, I heard my cat hissing from behind me. Both of my bar stools were spinning, one clockwise and the other counterclockwise. Then it was like someone had grunted in my ear. Mentally, I tried to reason that my boyfriend had come over and was messing with me until I realised he was at his place, more than likely asleep, and he doesn't have a key. I was still holding my little taser, and I hit the trigger and jammed it backwards, hoping to hit whoever was behind me. No sound, no nothing. No one was behind me. I then called my boyfriend, obviously shaken up and not really wanting to talk about it when he asked. But today things picked up a lot more. See, I work night shift, therefore I sleep during the day. I was showering this morning. I live alone with my kitten and my dog. The kitten was in the shower with me because he's weird, and my dog was curled up on the mat next to the toilet. I turned around to reach for my soap, and it was like someone was standing in the bathroom, pushing their arm through the shower curtain to touch me. I slapped it, not really knowing what to do. I think I made it mad. The curtain flung open, and all the hooks came off the shower rod, and the whole thing hit the ground. My dog, who is normally tame and a big scaredy cat, started growling and ran out of the room. I decided my hair didn't need to be washed and ran out of the room, completely forgetting about my towel. At this point, I was standing in the living room sopping wet, my dog crying with the kitten on the couch while I slowly spun around. It was like my apartment was alive. Everything seemed to be moving. The bar stools, the Polaroid camera on my coffee table, even the leashes hanging from hooks by the door swayed. As fast as it happened, it all stopped. It was quiet for a moment until my pet's food containers flipped over in the kitchen, and the water faucets in the bathroom and kitchen turned on full blast. I'd like to note that my kitten has learned how to turn them on, so he can sit under the water, which I began to blame on him, until I felt him walk up and start licking the water off of my legs. I felt like crying at this point, like this horrible gut-wrenching feeling filled me, like something that felt worse than anything I've ever felt before. That's when I decided I had to go. I started pulling on random clothes that I left hanging over my bar stool, and I was putting on my pants. I noticed my extremely thick hair wasn't hanging over my head like it should when I'm pulling my still wet body through leggings. A couple strands were lifted, like someone was holding them away from my face. I screamed and ran outside, holding my kitten and my very large dog in my arms. I could hear what sounded like growling as I closed the door. I sat in my car for about an hour and a half before I went back inside and put my dog in his kennel. When I shut both latches. At this time, I actually left. I was gone for about an hour due to an errand I had to run, and when I opened my front door, my dog jumped on me. Mind you, I locked him in his cage. His collar was off, unclipped, and he seemed happy enough. The cat bed and blanket that stayed on top of it was also on the floor, and the kennel door was still locked. I was in shock to say the least.
My dog's a big boy, very muscular, and this escape trick has only happened twice before. Once when I first got him, and today being the second. The entire apartment was cold, and truthfully, I feel like I've tried everything to try and protect myself and my pets. I'm strong in my faith. I pray every day. I've saged my apartment, as has the paranormal team that came 3 times, but nothing seems to be helping. But even with all of this, plus the previous stuff I have yet to post about on this, I have to say my bedroom is the absolute scariest place to be in my very small apartment. If anyone can offer advice or anything, please help me.
It's been a little while since I've written about one of my many encounters. I had to take a hiatus because I believe stirring up these old memories has caused more activity, mild, in my life. I've been seeing shadows walking in the hallways, hearing whispers. Stuff has been moving to only show up later. Just odd occurrences, nothing too scary. I'm going to speak about a few small encounters, happy ones, that have happened to me throughout the years that were just a reminder that something was always with me. I first would like to talk about my Uncle Steve. He wasn't a biological uncle, step-grandpa's son, but we had a very close relationship. I love art and drawing is my passion, and we shared that. God, he was an amazing artist. He died suddenly from a heart attack when I was a teenager, and despite him not being a blood uncle, his death broke my heart into pieces. However, I would feel him every now and then. Do you know how some people just produce a certain kind of energy? How you can feel it when you're around them? Steve had that when he was alive, and I also believe he had that after his death. There were several small incidents that just made me smile, but I want to talk about one in particular that happened around Christmas, and was also witnessed by my grandmother, his father, my mom, and my father. It was the first Christmas after his passing, and the year before, he had brought my grandmother some wind chimes. She didn't want the weather to damage them, so she kept them inside. We were all sitting around the Christmas tree just reminiscing about old times and Uncle Steve. Suddenly, the wind chimes in the kitchen began to make music and move. Granted, there was no wind inside the house, and really no logical reason they suddenly began to move. We all smiled and joked that Steve was there with us. It was just a pleasant feeling. At this point in my life, most of my family had accepted the fact that I had an unusual connection with the supernatural, so they asked me to start talking to him. I asked, "Uncle Steve, was that you? Are you here?" At that moment, the lights on the Christmas tree blinked, which was unusual because they had been on the entire time. Out of curiosity, they all had me ask more questions, such as if he was happy, if he watched out for us. Nothing too over the top. After every question, the lights would flicker and the wind chimes would make music. It truly was amazing. We all were in tears because you could feel he was there. I still feel Uncle Steve occasionally, and I have many of his art pieces. I also would like to talk about my Aunt Jean. She was such a lovely lady and passed away unexpectedly from blood clots after surgery. Her death was devastating to my family, and I don't think we've ever recovered. A few months later, I got really sick, coughing up blood, and I wasn't able to catch my breath. I took myself to the hospital, and it was quickly determined that I had 7 pulmonary embolisms. One was the size of a $50, and the blood was coming from my right lower lobe because I had a blockage. I was only breathing 52%. I was in pure panic. I knew I had to call my mother and my family because I was getting admitted to the ICU. After losing our Aunt Jean from the same thing, I was more concerned with their reaction than my diagnosis. As I started ringing for my mother, I had a mental image of my aunt telling me everything was going to be okay, and I instantly had a calming sense come over me. Instead of crying on the phone to my family, I told them what was going on and I was going to be okay. Everybody rushed to the hospital. I don't remember much when I was awake, but I had a dream that day. They instantly gave me pain medicine, which always puts me to sleep, of my Aunt Jean. It was a dream full of bright, beautiful colours, and she was walking towards me, surrounded by flowers. She hugged me so tight and grabbed my face and told me not to be scared, that I was going to be okay. I remember the dream so vividly. There were red and blue birds flying everywhere. The sky was such a beautiful colour of blue. When she touched me, I really felt her. It felt so real and so calming. When I woke up, my mum was there. She flew up from Florida that day. My dad, my aunts, and so many of my friends. They all said I was talking in my sleep and smiling. The hospital stay was about a week, and I had a long recovery of Lovenox shots for 6 months. We discovered that the clots were due to my birth control at the time. During my recovery process, I would see tons of cardinals and bluebirds and would instantly get a feeling of relief because I knew it was my aunt just checking in on me. 2 months ago, I had a pretty major surgery, and I once again developed multiple pulmonary embolisms. I had another dream with Aunt Jean in it. It was just as colourful and just as calming. She told me not to give up, and that this too will pass. I was only in the hospital for 4 days. I caught them early. It's the same recovery. Lovenox shots for 6 months. However, I've seen a cardinal nearly every day since I left the hospital, and I know that my Aunt Jean is watching over me every single day. Not all supernatural/explained experiences have to be negative. The other day, the local paper did a report on one of the places on my list, so I took it as a sign. I was originally hesitant to tell this story, as they recently rebranded this place, and I was a little scared of being sued. I didn't know if this hotel was trying to keep the past hidden, but since they've recently spoken up about the history themselves, I figured it's fair game. The Drury Inn is a fairly new hotel to the downtown area. They only opened in the last 10 or so years. However, the building that is now the Drury Inn has been there for quite some time. This hotel used to be the original St. Vincent Hospital, being the only hospital in Santa Fe for a very long time. The old hospital has more than its fair share of horror stories and resident ghosts. So the fact that it's now a luxury hotel is mind-boggling to me. I'll be honest, I personally would never lay my head there, even if I did have the money. Where to begin? I guess I'll tell the more mild of the two, most well-known events at the hospital. During a late winter night, a young and fairly new nurse was working in the third-floor nurse station. Going about her duties, she heard a child crying coming from down the hall from where she was. She walked the hall till she was standing in front of room 311. This is where the crying was coming from. When she opened the door to see, the crying stopped. No one was set up in this room at the time, so of course she was very confused. She thought maybe she misheard where it was coming from, so she went around and checked the other rooms, yet every patient was in fact asleep. As she went back to the nurse station from behind her, she heard once again the painful crying of a young child. She swiftly walked back to room 311, where she got the door, she flung it open and flipped on the lights. But of course the crying stopped once more. She even went as far to check under the bed, but yet again nothing. Trying to calm herself, she went back to the nurse station to sit down. For a little while, it was silent until the crying began again. Imagine how she felt, being a nurse, a person who genuinely wants to help people, and hearing a helpless baby crying in pain, yet you cannot help. So again, she walked to 311, and yet again the crying stopped as soon as she opened the door. The next night she came in to work her shift, and caught a couple of fellow nurses before they left. She told them about her eventful night, and their faces changed. They told her that everyone who worked the night shift on the third floor heard the crying, and it picked up in the winter, especially around Christmas time. They told her to just ignore it. And for a little while, she didn't even hear the crying until Christmas Eve. She knew from the beginning that it was a baby, as she had worked with babies in the hospital before, and to her, the cry a baby makes when it's in pain was unlike anything else, and unfortunately, was burned into her memory. So for a while, she listened to the crying, and that's when the cry turned into the sound of the baby gasping for air. It was the sound she also knew, the sound of a baby taking its last breaths. A week later, she mentioned the event to some co-workers as they had dinner. One of the other nurses at the table told us she had been on duty on the 3rd floor on Christmas Eve a few years prior. She said there was a bad car accident on the highway. In one of the cars was a father and his infant little boy. The dad died at the scene and they rushed the baby to the hospital, which, may I add, is quite a long drive from the highway where the crash had taken place. Apparently, the little boy was suffering from internal bleeding. It was only a couple hours later when the poor angel succumbed to his injuries. The nurse said she still remembered hearing the little boy take his last breaths, but they were rough and deep. The fairly new nurse asked her which room the baby had died in, and of course, it was room 311. I wonder if the Drury Inn rents 311 out during the holidays. I mean, it seems to already be occupied. This is a truly heartbreaking tale of the old building that I can imagine holds many like this. However, on the other side of the spectrum, the building holds something much darker. Every haunted place has its hotspot. For the old St. Vincent Hospital, that spot is the basement. People have reported experiencing many things in the basement. Disembodied voices and screams, things being banged on and crashing, seeing shadow people, and not only being touched but yanked, pushed, and pulled by their clothes and hair. This could be your normal run-of-the-mill haunting, right? However, people have also reported hearing low guttural growls, moaning, being scratched, and probably most scary is more than a couple of people have reported seeing blood dripping down the walls. Many will tell you there's no ghost in the basement, rather a demonic presence. They naturally used the space for storage, so staff didn't venture down there often. It's safe to say that every time someone went down there, they experienced something. At one point, when it wasn't a public hospital anymore, it was used as a nursing home. I don't know what made the nursing home staff less cautious than the hospital staff, but they took the rumours of the basements as an opportunity of sorts to scare each other. Anytime they had a new hire, they'd wait till nightfall and take the newbie down the service elevator to the basement. It was almost like a hazing ritual. They'd take them down, and when they'd reach the basement, they'd make the new nurse get out. They'd leave them with no flashlight in the dark, unfamiliar place, and tell them to find the staircase and meet them back on the 3rd floor. The lights in the basement didn't work at all for some reason or another, and the only light source that would be down there would be an exit sign. On top of that, the basement had been described as a maze-like. One night, after training a new nurse's aide, one of the other nurses was given the responsibility of escorting the new nurse down the elevator to the basement so she could complete her initiation. They reached the bottom and wished the girl good luck, and reminded her to meet them back at the 3rd floor. She went back to the 3rd floor nurse's station to wait for her. After about an hour, she started to wonder where she was. Even if she got lost, she should have already been able to find her way and make it back up. So she decided to go find her. However, she was scared to go alone, so she convinced another nurse's aide to go with her. When reaching the bottom, she got out to look for her, while the nurse's aides kept the elevator doors open to shed some light, although it didn't help much. Luckily, she did have a flashlight. She started searching rooms and then calling for the girl's name, when she heard a very quiet reply off in the distance. She yelled out to the side that she thinks she found her, and to wait for them. She went in the direction she heard her, and found the poor girl balled up in the corner of a big dusty room, quivering in fear behind an old filing cabinet. She helped the girl up and began leaving the room when she noticed something strange on the wall of the room. It was some kind of liquid. She ran her fingers down the wall to further examine the strange substance. It covered her fingers. Having nothing to wipe it off with and wearing her white uniform, she left it to dry on her hands. When they reached the elevator, she looked down to find her fingers were covered in what appeared to be blood. And when she smelled it, it was the unmistakable iron smell. That's when she began panicking, not wanting to be on that floor another second. They all stayed frightful long after they made it back up to the station. After the new aide calmed down enough, she told them what happened to her. She had begun trying to find the stairs, but kept bumping into things as it was so dark. She started hearing things behind her,
that sounded like small taps and then thuds. That's when she heard the growls coming from seemingly right behind her head. She took off running until she landed in her little spot where they found her. Later that night, the maintenance man overheard them talking about the experience and chimed in. Apparently, he had been the maintenance man there for a while, even back when it was still a hospital. He said the hospital staff used to use the furnace in the basement to cremate organs removed in surgery and even amputated limbs. I believe that all the energy the staff put into being scared of the basement only intensified the activity down there. Supposedly after this happened, the nursing home staff never carried out another initiation. Not too long after the nursing home shut down, and the building was left vacant for some time. In my teens, it was covered in graffiti and had many busted out windows. It was well known among my age group that teens would break into the building to party, explore, and probably see if they'd experienced anything paranormal. A couple times, my friends and I would sit outside the building on the steps and attempt to hold spirit box sessions, and we captured words like hospital, died, pain, meds, and help. A couple times, I swear I had seen figures in the windows next to the huge double-door entrance. Now you do understand how crazy it is to me that this is the very building that is now a luxury hotel, and also why I wasn't surprised reading the article in the paper that detailed a family staying there and being messed with all night long by an unseen force. Maybe if they'd done some research, but then again, I look at the building now, and there's honestly no resemblance to the once booming hospital, and a simple Google search on its current name won't spark much suspicion. Only when digging deeper with the original name will you uncover the past. Lucky you guys have me, so you won't have any surprises if you decide to book a room there.
I live with my mom and cats in a 2-story plus basement home, which we just recently moved into. Before this, we were living in a basement apartment, as it helped us to get back on our feet over the last year, after some pretty heavy stuff in the family. In most of the houses I lived in growing up, strange things happened in the majority of them. For example, a basketball randomly bouncing in my hallway in the early hours of the morning. But something about that basement apartment just kind of halted all of the strange activity happening at home. And this is when I started becoming more aware of the shadows, cold spots, and more at my girlfriend's house. In saying that, now in my new living situation, it seems that for some unknown reason, whatever has been following me around is back in full action. I'll list some of my experiences to make it easier to follow. Cupboards open here on their own, literally. You can shut them then leave the room for 30 seconds and they'll be open when you come back. My oven and stove light turn on by themselves all the time. I have a small fan on my nightstand that turns on by itself. The door to the basement will be closed in the morning, despite my mother and I never doing that, as the cat needs access to their litter boxes down there. I'm usually up later than Mom, so she will check the locks on the front and back door, and then I'll double check when I go to bed to make sure they're locked, just for both of them to be unlocked in the morning. Things go missing and reappear suddenly. For example, my mom has 2 Christmas ornaments that she absolutely loves. While we were decorating the tree this year, she hung the first one and the second one was nowhere to be found. When we both started looking for it, we were on the last bag of tree decorations that we store in clear plastic bags. She and I both looked for it in this bag when we were about 10 ornaments left in the bag. Not an overwhelming amount of them or anything, yet we both couldn't find it. After I explained the story to my girlfriend after she came over that night, I picked up the bag and sure enough, the ornament was in there. What has really started to startle me though, is 2 things that happened to me within the last week or so. I was walking up the stairs to go to bed last week, and something tugged on the back of my shirt, almost causing me to fall down the stairs. Then just 2 nights ago, I was laying on my phone playing some dumb games to try and sleep. And then all of a sudden, I just became completely still. I didn't know what was getting into me. I just had this overwhelming, anxious and fearful feeling. After about 30 seconds, I started feeling cold breaths on the back of my neck. I started to completely freak out at this point and just stayed still for about 5 minutes until suddenly the breathing stopped and all my negative feelings vanished like they were never there. Does anyone have any idea what this could be? Why would the activity stop in that particular house? And why is it back so strong in this new one? When I was 10 years old, I had the most vivid nightmare of my life to date. I was at the top of the stairs, saying goodbye to my parents, when I sensed something behind me. I turned and saw a huge black shadow figure standing over me. No matter how hard I looked at it, I simply couldn't see a face. I remember calling for my brother, who used to babysit me at the time, and no one came. The figure started to raise its arm over me, and I knew it meant me harm. I screamed out for my brother, and woke up in a cold sweat. I've never in my life been so frightened by something I assumed was inside my own head, but I took some comfort in the fact that it was only a dream. Sometime later, around Christmas time 2003, I recall coming downstairs around 11 to fetch my glass of water. I passed the living room, the door was open, and being a kid, I always stopped to take a glance at the Christmas tree. The room was empty. My parents were upstairs in bed, and I could hear my brother in his room playing video games. I continued to the kitchen and got a drink, and headed back up the hall. Again, I stopped to peek at the Christmas tree through the living room door. In the chair by the window, I saw someone sitting there. A tall figure that was completely cast in shadow. Immediately, I was afraid, but thought that perhaps it was my father having a late-night cigarette. I called for him, and there was no answer. The thing in the chair just sat there, completely still. It took a moment, but I eventually realised that I could see the orange glow of the streetlight through whatever was sitting in that chair. I remember thinking I was dreaming, remembering the dream I'd had a few months before, and being a dumb kid, I tried pinching myself, but obviously nothing happened. I remember the adrenaline and the cold chills. I was frightened of this thing, whatever it was, so I bolted for the stairs. From there, I could see into the living room, and I looked once more and saw this shadow thing standing from the chair and moving forward. It looked and moved like a man, except for the fact it was semi-see-through. I remember I took the rest of the stairs at a run and spilled most of my water down myself. I looked in on my brother, and he was still there. I stood at the top of the stairs and listened, eventually hearing my father cough from inside his bedroom. I knew then for sure that thing was neither another male in the house. I ended up sharing my brother's room that night. He offered no resistance, seeing that I was in a bit of a state, but I never spoke of what I saw. I guess over time I just didn't think about this anymore. Maybe I convinced myself that I imagined the whole thing, but this past summer I had another dream, the first time in over 15 years. It was a waking dream of sorts. I was in bed at about 5 a.m, and what I recall most vividly was the sun streaming through the window and filling the room. I remember flopping my head to the side and staring at my bedroom door, and it was there. This huge shadow figure that was as tall as my bedroom door. I could see the outline of a head, shoulders, a torso, arms, but absolutely no features. Again, just black. And once again, I could see the bedroom door through it, as though it was not entirely solid. I'll never forget the feeling of my heart leaping into my mouth at seeing this thing, and I shot up in bed and screamed. I literally screamed the house down. Cue frantic scrabbling and pounding from the next room, and my dad charges in, finding me hyperventilating in bed. "What? Dream?" I remember he asked. He was clutching his hunting knife. I agreed and sank back into bed, but after the shock wore off, I started recalling the experiences of year prior. I can't deny it caused discomfort, but I dismissed it as just a dream and even joked in the following days about waking the whole house. It was maybe 3 weeks later, and I was home alone. It was maybe 11 p.m. to midnight. I'd gone to the kitchen for some reason and was standing over the sink. I looked up and caught my reflection in the kitchen window. I had the lights on, it was dark outside, and it was clear as day. Behind me, as I was by the sink, was a tall, lanky shadow figure. Again, I saw a head, shoulders, arms. I have chills right now just recalling this one. It's fresh. I know it was no dream and no far-off memory. I turned around and there was absolutely nothing behind me. I glanced back at the window and it was still there, reflected behind me. So I ran. I charged through the hall, up the stairs and into my room. My intent was to grab my phone and call someone to come home. I remember so vividly that as I reached for my phone off the vanity, the loudest, deepest growling sound I've ever heard seemed to come from the upstairs hallway outside my room. I know it's not a brave or cool thing to admit, but I dove into the closet at that point and hid. It was about half an hour or more before I felt brave enough to come out and turn the lights on. Although I got comfort when people returned to the house, I couldn't sleep and began thinking of the previous dreams, the figure I'd seen so many years before in the living room. What if this was somehow connected?
When we first went upstairs, there was a brand new toilet paper holder still in its package in the washroom. The holder would play Christmas carols when you turned it. I thought it was cute and set it up in the washroom. My sister and I used. The whole day, the music did not work when we used the washroom, so we assumed it was dead. At around 3 a.m, my sister and I were sitting in my room and on a video call with my buddy. For context, our washroom is right next to my room, attached. Suddenly, we start hearing jingle bells playing. The three of us went silent. Nobody was in the washroom. My parents were asleep and snoring, and my sister and I were together. It stops, and we calm down a bit, but it immediately starts playing again. At this point, my buddy is freaked out and begs me to go and check it out. Being the older sister, I didn't have much choice. I go into the washroom, and the carol stops. I remove the toilet paper holder, break it in half, and throw it outside in the garbage bin. The next day, I went down to the basement to find the toilet paper holder in the middle of the living room, just there, fully intact. I broke it again and threw it out, never to be seen again. Another incident that happened the day after the toilet paper holder. I was sitting in my room and heard a loud bang outside the door. I assumed my sister was putting something up in her room, which was right next to mine, and ignored it. Then I heard 2 more bangs and got annoyed and went into her room to yell at her. I asked, "What the hell are you making so much noise for?" And she looked at me confused. She says, "I thought that was you." Once again, my parents were both deep asleep and we double-checked to make sure they were. The night after I was in the washroom and I heard someone come out of a room, shut the door, go downstairs, open and close cupboards, and come back up and go into a room. I was curious as to who it was because it was around 1 a.m. and only my sister and I were awake, but the footsteps were much lighter than hers. Once I was done, I went into her room to ask what she went down to get. And once again, she said, "I thought that was you." Now, this story is the last incident and by far the most horrifying. My sister and I went upstairs to grab something from a room. We were in her room for about 5 seconds max. When we came back out, there were 2 handprints on the wall. Black handprints, bigger than both of ours and our mom, and smaller than my dad's. We asked our parents and they had no idea where it came from. These handprints were not there 5 seconds before when we came upstairs. They appeared within the 5 seconds we were in her room. We called our cousins on video call to show them, and my sister went ahead and touched the handprints. Nothing. I went to touch the handprints, and black ink smudged all over my hand. Nothing on the wall, but black ink all over my hand. I had 3 people watching this happen. My sister, cousin, and his girlfriend. I went to wash my hands and came back and touched the prints. Nothing. I'm not too worried about the first few incidents, but the last one still worries me a bit. Why did the ink smudge on my hand? Is it an omen? It happened about 2 years ago, and I still think of it till this day. Between 2016 to 2019, there was tons of activity in my home, and during this time, my mum had a boyfriend who lived with us. My room used to have Christmas lights up in the earlier years, when I was 15 and 16.
My mum had a rule that I had to sleep with the door open, so I wouldn't stay up at night on my phone without her catching me. I would wake up between 5:30 and 6 to get ready for school and be out the door by 7. Usually, my mum's boyfriend would be long gone by then, but one day I woke up just in time to see him pass by the hall. He's about 6'1", 6'2", and nothing seemed unusual about it, except he had a dark mass following behind him that I could see as a shadow against the wall, which was weird because his actual shadow was on the floor in front of him as he passed. I remember feeling pure dread, and so I closed my eyes and tried not to think about it anymore. I never saw that shadow again, but that wasn't the only shadow person I had in my home. I usually would unplug my lights when it was time to go to school to save energy, but sometimes I'd forget. Once I came home after school, and during dinner, my mom's boyfriend says something along the lines of, "Oh, I saw you sitting on your bed this morning. You must have gotten to school really late, huh?" And I looked at him in confusion and I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he looked at me a bit stunned. He asked me what time I had left, and I said 7 a.m. like always. And he looked scared and told me that at around 7:20 a.m. he was rushing past my room because he was running late. And he saw a figure sitting on the edge of the bed and assumed it was me since my lights were still on, and left the house. That definitely freaked me out, and I couldn't sleep comfortably in my room after that for weeks. When I was around 12 years old, I was at my cousin's house for a party. We were hanging out in the backyard and woods. Part of their backyard is a wooded area, and came to this tree that I used to have a tree house in it. All that's left of that tree house is some steps leading to it, and a few platforms. Not safe to get up, if you can even at all. My cousin, 8 at the time, told this story about how the kids who had that tree house had died when it collapsed. I, personally, think this was a bunch of BS, but went with it. We eventually headed back to the house, but I decided to go back into the woods alone. As I was walking into the woods, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Like I was safe there, safer than anywhere else. As I'm looking around, and I see a light blue and white checkered flag up in a super thin tree that I didn't notice before. As I'm looking at this and trying to figure out how it got there, I started to hear kids' voices, laughing, talking, just having fun. I didn't think too much of it at the time, as my cousins were out in the treehouse. As I'm walking closer to the old treehouse, the voices seemed louder, and I looked back up at the flag. It was moving despite there not being any wind. I shook it off as I couldn't feel the wind from down here, but up there was wind and looked back down. That's when I say, them. 6 children with white skin, like snow-white skin. They all seemed to be wearing winter gear, though dull and dirty clothing. They were walking towards me, but I didn't run. I wasn't afraid for some reason. I heard a branch snap, and that's when I ran. As I went back towards my cousin's house, I was surprised to see that they weren't outside. I found them in the living room playing video games. When I asked them when they came in, they said, "When you were walking in the woods, why?" Kids I heard weren't them. Still don't know to this day who those kids were. They weren't other neighbours' kids, as none of them lived close by to my cousins. Were they a figment of my imagination? Whatever it was, it's one of the reasons I believe.
On December 12th of last year, me and my family moved into a new house. I was between my first and second semester of college when we moved, so I decided to take up a part-time position at a Christmas tree farm to get some extra cheese for the holiday. That pretty much meant I was never home. After a few days of actually living there, something started happening. Now, I'm a lazy bastard. I didn't unpack for like another 2 months. In fact, I still have a box or two with clothes and other shit that I just haven't touched. Anyway, there were about a dozen boxes of various things sitting inside my room. After a shift at the farm one night, I went to a buddy's house and spent the night, and didn't get home till 2 p.m. the next day. So I was out of the house for over 24 hours. My mum was home alone decorating the living room when she started hearing boxes being thrown in my bedroom. She assumed I was finally unpacking, so she didn't think much of it. The throwing became more and more aggressive as time went by, so she eventually busted into my room to figure out what my malfunction was. Except all of the boxes were where I left them, and the room was empty. It was weird, but got weirder when my mom remembered that the guy who lived here several years ago hit his off switch in the middle of the house on Christmas Eve. We had to do a lot of work on the home before we moved in, so it had been 2 months before we actually moved in, which is why it slipped my mother's mind that the guy died. I think his name was either Billy or Bobby. Something you name your kid that sounds good on a kid, but becomes odd when the kid turns 30. Anyway, it turns out he offed himself in my bedroom. Didn't bother me really, and I figured if he's gonna haunt me, it's cool. As long as he sticks to throwing boxes and doesn't actually mess with me. A day or two passes, and I'm in my bedroom unpacking when I hear this loud crash and glass shattering. So I run downstairs to see what happened and make sure everyone was okay, and I see my parents just sitting on the couch. I asked what happened, and my mom just sort of gestures to the floor and said the clock fell. I looked, and sure enough, the clock we had on the wall had fallen off and broke. She said not to worry about it, and she'd clean it in a minute. At first glance, I thought that the screw I had planted on the wall to hang it had slipped, but it didn't sit right with me. So I checked it out, and the screw was still in the damn wall. I had to plant it into a stud in the wall with a daily-long screw, so it didn't pry itself out. The clock is stupid heavy because it's a big decorative piece made of metal, and the place you hang it on is one of those little keyhole things on the back of it that you slide over the screw or nail to prevent it from falling. This clock definitely could not have fallen off the wall on its own, but my folks said that it had. The last encounter I personally had was definitely lackluster in comparison to the others. I was home alone and my dog was following me around to steal my sandwich. She's a 3-pound toy Yorkie poo, and despite giving everyone in the house grief for wanting this tiny dog, I like her enough to spoil her when nobody's looking. So I bent down to give her a little scrap of turkey when she started freaking the fuck out. While I'm trying to calm her down, I hear this tapping on the stove. We have a cookie jar that we recycle to use as our cooking ware container that sits between two of the eyes on the stove. I look at it and it's gently rattling, but I figured it was just something that happened in the house that I hadn't caught, like perhaps the AC kicking on and shaking it a bit or something. It just didn't bother me at first, till it started getting more and more aggressive, until I thought the jar was going to explode or some shit. But before it could, everything went silent. No rattles, no barking. I even realised I had started holding my breath. The next day was Christmas Eve, and I was expecting the house to implode, but it didn't. Nothing happened in the house after that, until early this morning, which reminded me of all that shit. Nothing big happened, but I got off my shift at about 11 and went to bed at around 1. I was asleep for maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours when my dog started flipping shit in the hallway. I get up and look out into the hallway, and I don't see shit. My younger brother wakes up and peeks out with me, and he asks what's going on. We've had some issues with trespassing before, so I got very defensive of the house and sent my brother back to his room so I could take a look. I flip on the hallway light, and there's nothing there, but my dog is still fucking panicking like her life is about to end. My parents' room is downstairs in the basement, so they don't really catch wind of this till the next day when I tell them. I start to panic, and I'm flipping on every light to every room, searching for anyone there. And all of a sudden, she stops barking. No calming down, just ceases. It reminded me of the cookie jar that I was relieved for about 2 seconds, because I knew, oh my god, nobody was really in the house. But I didn't like the idea of this old dude lingering around again now that it's getting closer to Christmas.
So I'll start off by saying I'm very into the paranormal. However, I maintain that I'm a skeptic. I haven't really had any outlandish experiences. Nothing like a ghost screaming in my ear or seeing a full-body apparition.
Mostly stuff like feeling uneasy in certain areas, hearing little whispers and creaks and groans, seeing things out of the corner of my eye. I also experience hallucinations, so I try to keep that in mind. I also like to shop at Goodwill a lot. You can get cheap junk here, and I love junk, especially dolls. I have a few haunted dolls, a few that are just decoration, but nothing I've ever gotten from Goodwill I ever considered haunted. Until recently. My significant other and I went to Goodwill a day or so ago to pick up some last-minute gifts, and as we were looking around, I saw this large wooden box that's mostly black with some hand-painted birds and things. It's pretty old, maybe 25 to 50 years old, I don't really know. But I knew my mother-in-law would love it because she has an affinity for boxes. So we pick it up and head out to there. No uneasy feeling. No feeling at all for it, really. But maybe I was too scatterbrained at that time and not really listening to any sixth sense I might have. That night, I got to bed relatively early, which is unusual for me as I have a really hard time falling asleep and usually don't get to bed till around 4 in the morning. Maybe an hour after I fall asleep, I suddenly wake up and experience what I'm assuming was sleep paralysis. My head is tucked under my significant other's shoulder and between pillows, so I can't see anything, but I could feel that there was someone else there. I told myself to relax, it'll pass, and I'll be able to sleep soon. This isn't the first time I've had paralysis, and it probably won't be the last. Granted, it hasn't happened for at least 3 years. Suddenly, I get the urge to turn my head and look at my door leading from the bedroom to my attic. But I know I shouldn't look, because I'll probably see something I don't want to, and I can't exactly move anyway. But for some ungodly reason, the urge to turn my head and look was so wrong I felt like, holy shit, I'm breaking out of sleep paralysis. Isn't that a first? I didn't look, thank God, but the presence that I felt earlier was stronger, and I was getting that scary little demon girl in a horror movie vibe. Eventually, I fell back asleep without realising it, but when I woke up, I had the worst pain in my chest, and my neck was all tied up on one side. I'm talking, it felt like I had someone punching my chest every time I took a breath or moved, or was alive in any way. And if I tried to turn my head, my neck would explode. This happened the next night as well, but I have no idea whether or not it happened a third time, because it was Christmas Eve, so it was time to wrap it up and send it off to my mother-in-law. I didn't say anything to her about it, because I honestly didn't attribute what was going on to the box. I actually completely forgot all about it until I had to wrap it. Since I've given it to her, however, I've been sleeping like a baby and woke up feeling refreshed and without any aches or pains. I'm interested in talking to her a little down the road and seeing if she's experienced any of the same thing. Maybe if that box really is a spooky demon box, she'll say something before I get the chance to bring it up. This happened on Christmas Eve, but I've only been able to sit down and write it out now. I work as a cop in a small town where usually nothing happens. Last summer some children went missing and I helped on the case. They thankfully were found and I learned there were creatures living in the dark. However, knowing there were supernatural creatures out there didn't change how I lived. When we got a report of a man missing on one of the hiking trails, I didn't think anything strange happened. He just got lost in the snow that was coming down. I joined the search party looking for him while reviewing what we knew. A tall, dark-haired man signed in at the ranger station that day before saying he would sign back out at the end of the day. When he didn't arrive, the rangers started to worry. They did a quick check along the trails asking if anyone had seen him. They hoped he just forgot to sign out. When they found torn clothing and blood on the trail, the situation became more serious. There wasn't enough blood to know if he died, only that he was hurt in some way. The torn scraps of clothing matched the pants the man was wearing, so the rangers called us out for some help. I was still a newbie when I came to search and rescue, so I stayed by my team to look through the trails. The first day, everyone came up empty. We started to think this was a body recovery mission due to the dropping temperatures. When the snow started to fall, we didn't think this man would make it if he was injured. On Christmas Eve, I was out searching again. To my great embarrassment, I got lost. It was pretty impressive that I was separated from my group when I was surrounded by professionals in the field. As we walked in the frozen woods, glittering from the recent snowfall, I heard something. On the wind was the faintest voice calling for help. I heard something, I told my team leader over my shoulder. I'm just going to take a few steps over there to check it out. Hugh, wait for us to go together, my leader replied. He took a step and got his foot caught in something under the snow. He swore, and I didn't wait as I was told, but he was only a few feet away and still within sight. I reassured him once again I was only going to take a few steps ahead. When I did so, I slipped down a slope I didn't see. Luckily, I wasn't harmed from the short fall, just surprised by what happened. I sat in waist-deep snow, cold and confused. My radio and phone were still working, and that was a good sign. I would just need to wait a few seconds for someone to see me so I could rejoin the team. My radio crackled at my shoulder. Hugh, where did you go off to? My team leader demanded, sounding stressed. I slipped down a little slope. I can climb up on my own. I should be right in front of you, just a few feet away, I answered back. There was a long pause and I listened, trying to locate my leader. Something wasn't right. I was so nearby, I should have heard myself on the radio. But nothing stirred in those woods. I should be hearing something, and yet it was as silent as the grave. I don't see you. You just disappeared right in front of me. It's weird. Try climbing up and then stay in one spot. All right, see you shortly. I spoke into my radio, then clipped it back on. It wasn't until I climbed to the top of the slope with some difficulty that I started to get worried. I should have seen my own footprints in the snow, and yet there was none. I couldn't see where I slipped a few minutes before or any other signs of life. I started to suspect something not natural was going on when I didn't see anyone else in those woods. I tried my radio again, only to have nothing happen. I could listen to other channels, but nothing I said was getting out. My phone was doing the same thing. The GPS wasn't working, nor was it able to call or text. My radio cracked to life, and I jumped at the noise. We found Hugh. Team 11 is going to bring him down to get warm. We'll keep looking without him. After that last message, the radio went dead. It no longer turned on, even after I replaced the batteries. I stood frozen, in fear, staring at the now useless radio. There weren't 11 teams out today. For some reason, I was stuck in the middle of the cold forest without anyone looking for me. I knew if I let myself panic, it would only bring my survival rate down. I thought I remembered how to get back to the trail. We didn't go very far before I was separated. If that didn't work out, I would hunker down somewhere I could stay warm and think of a different plan. I don't know if something supernatural was going on. Now that I'd seen those sort of things, I believed in them. I could be trapped in a loop again. By some miracle, I found the trail again. I may be on the trail, but I was literally not out of the woods yet. As I walked, I kept an eye on the time. It was getting dark earlier, and it felt like the temperature had dropped since I'd gotten lost. I knew I only had a few more minutes of walking until I reached the end of the trail, when I heard the sound that caused me to walk off in the first place. Someone screamed for help. I turned on my heels, nearly tripping myself from moving so fast. The sound was close and desperate. I did something very stupid. Instead of walking to safety, I did the same thing that got me lost in the first place. I went towards the direction of the noise, with my gun at my side. Someone, please! The voice was hoarse. It sounded as if he was screaming and running at the same time. I charged forward and nearly collided with the screaming man. Stepping aside at the last second, he flew forwards, tripping over into the snow. His heavy pack forced him off balance. At first, I wondered why he still had such a heavy thing on his back. Then I realised without his supplies, he wouldn't have survived in the cold overnight. I lifted him out of the snow, the panicked man coughing and sputtering. Run! We need to run! He shrieked, grabbing a hold of my arm. Before I asked him what we were running from, the snow a few feet away from us started to burst up, as if something unseen was moving through it. Then I realised something was moving under the snow. Hauling the skinny man along, we both started to move as fast as possible, with something on our heels. I felt him get caught on something. He jerked backwards as something grabbed his bag.
As I pulled him forwards, I heard a ripping sound. He'd lost his water bottle pouch and all the contents, but we escaped with our lives. At least, for the moment. We found the trail again, worn out from our run through the snow and the woods. Our second wind came in, and we ran along the uneven ground as more snow along the trail kicked up following us. I wasn't even thinking. I was just running as fast as I could, trying to get us safe. The man stumbled again. I wasn't quick enough to catch him or stop his fall. He crashed to the ground, and I couldn't stop right away. Panting, he sat up in horror as someone burst out from the snow, directly towards its victim. I only saw a vague shape of the creature covered in fur. I wasn't very big, but I knew it was deadly. Raising my gun, I fired. I didn't hit the creature, but scared it enough for it to dart back into the snow and away from us. Looking around, I didn't see any more of the strange creatures moving in the snow. They could be staying still, watching us, but I didn't see a sign of them. I quickly went over and helped the man up. I took his pack from him so he could move faster. He had been lost for over a day already. I was the strongest of the pair. We kept going, hoping we would see some help soon. He remained silent as he walked as fast as possible. Neither of us could run just yet. The longer he walked, the more the fear spread. Finally, we stopped, him exhausted and needing a break. I shared my water and a half-frozen granola bar. "Shouldn't we be at the end of the path yet?" he asked, after eating and thanked me for the small meal. Yes, we should. The problem is, I don't recognize anything in the area. I made sure to remember what the trail out looked like just in case I got lost, I commented, looking over the unfamiliar trail. He looked even paler than before. His glasses slipping down his face, he adjusted them with trembling hands. I looked him over, wondering what he was doing out here. I've only worked in this area for half a year, but you start to notice what type of people go camping and hiking. He wasn't wearing any brands of clothing made for winter hikes or camping. His tent and sleeping bag rolled on his pack looked like summer ones. I wondered how he wasn't freezing in his wet jeans. Maybe hiking was a new hobby he just picked up. I didn't introduce myself. I'm Hugh. I'm an officer. We were looking for you. You're Richard, correct? I extended my hand for him to take. He shook it, looking a bit nervous. Richard was a very thin man. His fingers are bony and cold, even through his gloves. Good thing I found him as soon as I did. He would starve to death in a few days because his body already had nothing to work with. Yes, I'm Richard Hort. I was told by my boss that hiking would be a great hobby for me, so I listened to him. I really should have waited until the summer. I wasn't expecting to get lost, but I brought a tent with me in case I did, he explained. We were walking as we spoke, and Richard kept looking in every direction. I didn't blame him. The sun was starting to set, and we hadn't seen anyone else. Those creatures could attack us at any moment. I wasn't certain if I could keep my hands steady enough to hit a small moving target in the cold and dark. Is your leg all right? We found part of your pants and some blood. I asked Richard, noticing he wasn't limping. He lifted his leg to show off his sock over the top of his warm pants. He gave me a bit of a shy look, as if he was embarrassed. I'm fine. One of those things grabbed my pants and I stabbed it with a knife I carried. But it got away with my knife still inside it, and I didn't even get a good look at it. I was impressed by him, even though he didn't kill the creature and lost his weapon. He looked nervously at the setting sun and the cloud rolling in. Still, we hadn't got to the end of the trail. I didn't think we would before dark. At least you only lost part of your pants. We'll figure out how to get safe, I said, hoping I sounded confident in my answer. Any confidence left us when the sun went down. We agreed to set up for the night. Being on the trail felt sulphur than the harsh wind made it possible to keep the tent up. We found a space between some trees with low enough snow to attempt to start a fire. Richard was hunched over, building a very small fire pit as I hammered in the tent pegs. My hands felt frozen and numb before I was even finished. Off in the woods, small noises made us freeze in our work. Neither of us commented on how every sound could be one of those creatures. Finally, a fire was set up so we could huddle around trying to stay warm. It was pretty difficult finding enough twigs to burn. Our fire was small, but it was something. Snow started to drift down on the wind. I checked my phone to see if I could get a signal at all. Nothing, but the clock said it was 9 p.m. "Early Merry Christmas," I said to Richard in a low whisper. He gave me a strange look. Then a smile came over his face as he got closer, trying to steal any of my body heat he could. We could die from mysterious creatures or just the elements. The only thing I could control is how we dealt with it. I found another granola bar in my pack. I offered it to Richard, only to have him shake his head. Forcing it inside his hand, I stared forwards, trying to think of something else we could do. In truth, I felt completely helpless. I wasn't some sort of tough monster hunter or super cop. I barely knew anything about camping or hiking. I'd been trying to learn whatever I could, only to have the information not stick in the slightest. At least my water bottle was metal. We could pack it with snow to melt it over the fire. We took turns drinking hot water that helped us stay warm and hydrated. "You should rest. I can stay on watch. My phone should still work if I keep it warm and off. I can wake you up in a few hours. Do you know how to fire a gun?" Richard looked pale, but nodded. He didn't appear to look very interested in having to shoot at the creatures that attacked him. I made him show me that he could, in fact, aim properly. His hands shook in the cold, which was expected. Mine would do the same in the heat of the moment. I wished Richard was found by someone else. I could only do what I was able to keep up going. "Wake me up in 2 hours," Richard asked. I nodded, knowing I was lying. He needed more rest than only 2 hours. As Richard was curled up inside the tent, I kept the tiny fire going. I kept checking my radio. It was tempting to check the time every 5 minutes. Every small sound caused my body to tense. The snow started to get heavier. The small fire wasn't giving enough heat. I was soon trembling so hard it hurt. Still, I didn't wake up Richard to trade places with him. I wanted to stay outside for as long as possible. The cold may be making me delusional. Growing weak, I nearly nodded off outside when a sound snapped me back to attention. It was a ripping sound coming from the tent. I shot up, only to fall back because of my weak legs. Richard let out a cry of shock that motivated me to move. With numb fingers, I opened the tent as the other man frantically tried to get out. He piled on me as the tent was grabbed and dragged back into the darkness. Snow picked up around us. We did the only thing we could. We ran back to the trail. The moon reflected off the snow, letting us see. A growling sound came from our heels. As we stumbled onto the clear trail, small creatures darted out from the snow. I was clutching onto Richard in order to keep him upright. He was shaking from the sight of the third creatures that finally showed themselves. 2 stood on all fours facing us, growling away. I drew my gun, ready to shoot. What happened next caused me to freeze. The 2 creatures stood up on 2 legs. I could clearly see that instead of some small animals looking like beasts, they appeared almost human-like, wearing fur coats. Small, as if they were children. Orange glowing eyes stared at their prey. Both growled as their lips drew back, showing off countless sharp teeth. If I pulled the trigger, it would hit one of the creatures. It was taking small steps closer, but didn't get out of the way of my weapon. One small move, and I could injure or kill this thing. "Shoot it," Richard hissed in a low whisper. My finger tensed, but I didn't fire the gun. No matter how much I wanted to protect the man next to me, I just couldn't fire at the small thing coming ever closer. My body refused to move at that moment. Richard became panicked, looking between the gun and the monster that nearly killed him. He didn't understand why I didn't kill it. "It's only a child," I admitted in a distraught voice. I couldn't shoot it because it looked like a 5-year-old boy. A wild child with beastly features, but still a child. Richard looked betrayed at my actions, and I did betray him. I placed these creatures above both of us. I simply couldn't harm something so small. I let out a cry of regret as the creature burst forwards, knocking him to the ground. I watched in horror, still unable to fire my weapon as they tore at his jacket. He screamed while trashing. Unable to get away from, he begged for help. Feathers from his coat flew joining the snow. I let out a choked sob over the fact I just let a man die in front of my eyes. No, please, they're eating me! I shook at his voice. Unable to keep watching, I looked away, eyes shut tight. When I heard his final word, I opened my eyes to look back, confused. I could have sworn I heard Richard say blag. It was such a comical sound, I didn't believe it. No one being torn apart would even use such a sound. Children, come over here. This time, I was the one who felt betrayed. A voice I recognized called out to the small creatures, telling them to leave the man alone. They listened. Both ran on all fours away from Richard so I could see his torn open and bloody chest. No one should be able to live through those injuries. He looked dead. I was sure of it. Turning, I was ready to confront the new person who just arrived. In the snow was a boy no older than 14. Pure white hair and red eyes. He was distressed and an oversized sweater, and at the time I didn't notice he was wearing any shoes. I've come across him twice now, and I was still shocked to see him. Ellie? I choked out. The two creatures were circling him, but in a friendly way, as if they were cats receiving attention from their owner. Ellie may not look like much, but this small boy was powerful. All the supernatural creatures listened to him, whether they wanted to or not. It looked like you failed your test, the small boy commented, looked past me, and to the ruined chest of Richard. What test? I asked, utterly confused. Ellie gave a sigh. He was petting the small creatures, looking as if he was unsure of how to explain something difficult. I'm the Silver King, correct? Each king only lasted around 10 years. I need to find my replacement, but haven't put any effort into that at all. You appear to have qualities to be the next king, so I set up a test for you. You failed, because you're unable to kill a childlike creature, even if your life or if another depended on it. Now, Neff, please get up. You're giving poor Hugh trauma. Another shock came as Richard sat up. His coat was torn, but chest healed until all the blood disappeared. He gave me a smirk that didn't look like it belonged to the man I'd met that day. His posture was completely different. His eyes changed from a dark colour to a bright red. My jaw dropped open and I looked between him and Ellie. I just couldn't believe I'd been set up. You're... I said, still in shock. Just fine. Kind of cruel to think you caused a man's death, but I suppose it needed to be done. King candidates are respected by supernatural creatures, and we don't mess with you, even if you fail your test. You're still an honoured human, recognised by our king, so you shouldn't have any issues with nasty creatures from now on. Hey, want to go out for a drink to make up for faking my own death thing? Richard, or rather Neff, explained with a raised eyebrow. No thank you, I said, dismissing his flirting as kindly as possible. Oddly enough, he didn't look offended, but rather flattered someone refused him in a kind tone. Ellie was walking towards us, and my state of shock needed to wait. I finally saw he wasn't wearing shoes in the snow and panicked. My coat and shoes were far too big for him. He may be an all-powerful creature, but I just couldn't stop myself. I scooped him up and tucked him under my coat. I zipped it up so his head was sticking out, just like my own, and his cold feet tucked into my arms as I carried him. His face turned red, but he didn't struggle from being swooped up. When Neff let out a snort, Ellie narrowed his eyes. Eat him, the boy said to the small creatures, who gladly listened. I stared as the taller man took off, trying to evade the fur-wearing feral children, listening to their king. Is he going to be all right? I asked, as I watched them bite his heels. Maybe. I don't care. You should be getting back home before someone realises you're actually missing. The lie I created to get you alone will fall apart if you don't answer your phone or if someone checks in on you at home, Ellie explained, looking pretty content with being under my coat. I was still mildly traumatised by the night's events, but getting Ellie somewhere warm was what I focused on. I walked down the trail, finding my way out, and to my car very quickly, because nothing supernatural was keeping me in the woods. With some arguments, I told Ellie he was going with me to the station. I was ordering a king around. For some reason, he listened. The station was empty when we got back. I led him to a spare room with a couch for a few minutes. I made some hot chocolate and grabbed something I'd put aside in my desk I'd gotten, just in case our paths crossed again. He accepted the hot chocolate, saying he really needed to leave. You can go after you finish your drink. But first, here, Merry Christmas. Holding out a brown wrapped present to the boy, I waited for him to take it. He looked stunned, as if no one ever got him a Christmas present before. The sad thought was, that fact may be true. I bought him the gift back in warmer weather, not knowing when I would see the boy again. Putting aside his hot chocolate for a moment, he took the small gift. Inside was a pair of black flip-flops. He looked at them with an odd half smile on his face. I didn't think you would wear shoes if I gave them to you, I admitted. Ellie looked a bit shy, trying his best not to let his smile show. With a small thank you, he started to sip at his drink again. After you're done being king and passing it along to someone else, you're welcome to stay with me. I mean, if you don't have anywhere else to stay, that is. I know you're strong and all that, but I feel guilty because I'm an adult. I should be able to help you more. Ellie shook his head at my last statement. Looking over at the gift, he appeared distant, as if he was holding back an awful truth. Instead of revealing it, he simply smiled. You're doing more than most. Knowing I'm welcome and have a place to stay is more than I ever expected. I'm not a king to you. I'm just me. I haven't had that in a long time. He sounded almost sad at his own words. Putting aside his half-finished hot chocolate, he announced he needed to leave, but I wasn't having any of that. I ordered him to finish his drink, and then he could go. With a bit of a grumpy tone, he relented. By the time Ellie did finish his drink, the poor boy was nodding off. He let me tuck him in on the couch. By the time I turned off the lights, he was in a deep sleep. Without any doubt, this was a very rare time where he could just relax. I stayed at the office that night. I nodded off at my desk on and off until the morning crew came in and startled me awake. I checked the spare room to see that Ellie was gone. His clean mug in the sink and his flip-flops gone with him. He even folded the blanket before he left. Ellie's a good kid. I wish more than anything he would take me up on my offer to let him stay with me. For now, he's off doing a demanding job. There are creatures in the dark. I know that because I've seen them. Some are in the forest taking and eating people when they least expect it. Others are made simply to give children a good scare on Halloween. I know that even if I was a king's candidate, I would still come across these creatures and wonder what kind of danger I would get into. In the end, I felt it would all be worth it for a very small and very hard-working king.